Greetings everyone. Today we are going to cover one of the interview question from a retail organization, Loblaw Digital. That's a Canadian retail organization that is mostly into grocery, not mostly into grocery, but is in grocery segment. They were looking for a senior ML developer, and the requirement was 8 plus years of experience, all into data science, machine learning, right? And since they are into retail, they are into grocery. They were mainly looking for a person who has more experience with ML ops and end-to-end deployment pipeline of the tabular structure data. Right. So, so how do I start the conversation? Is basically I believe I am driving the conversation as long as I believe that I have 80% of the interview already succeeded. Now I start within the introduction of the graduation in which year I did and which subject or stream, right? For example, BTech Computer Science Engineering. And then in past 8 years, from which companies I have worked in. For example, here you can see C1, C2, and what set of projects and skills. So whenever you are talking about projects, this is what I have seen that the interviewee is talking too much about the project, how much they did, what is the value it brought, that is all fine. The interviewer is looking for the skills that you have implemented, what as a single person you did in that project, and what value it brought to the organization. These are the three key aspects that the interviewer is looking for. Right now, this is most of the people that who are watching this video, they already know that. Now we'll directly dive into the interview questions that have been asked upon, right? So one of the question that it all started was before from basic ML. So it started so from basic ML. The first question that they asked was basically difference between correlation versus causation. Now most of you might be thinking, ah, I know this, right? But this is where you need to explain it into two scenarios. One, you need to give a correct answer. Then the another thing is you need to explain it in a depthness as well. So when I say correct answer, you need to tell that correlation is basically, so this one is for correlation, this one is for causation. So when so you need to, when you are saying it is a correct answer, what does that means is you need to tell that correlation means that two variables move together in a consistent way, right? So if this is an x and a y, if this is x and this is y, your value should be in a consistent way, right? For example, and you definitely have to give an example. Yeah. So for example, you have to say that ice cream sales, they go up during summer, right? That is true. And then you need to, what is another, an example is basically people on beaches, this count go ups during summer as well. But do you see any correlation between them? No, right? If people are on beaches, will they buy ice cream? That is not influenced. Both are influenced by hot weather, but they they one does not causes the other. That is clear. That is the underlying scenario. Now talking about causation, right? We come back to causation. And what does causation mean? Causation means that one variable directly causes a change in another. That means that means if this is x and this is y and this is going up, then there has to be a yx variable going up as well. Example. Now you need to explain an example, right? So the example is that pressing a light switch causes the bulb to turn on. The action directly produces the outcome. So this is where it becomes important. You say action directly reduces outcome. If you eat too much of ice creams, too much of ice creams, you are bound to have cold, right? So this is correlation versus causation, and that is how you explain, and you get full marks for that. Now, second question, right? And the second question is, how do you handle overfitting? Ha, everyone knows that as well, right? Handle overfitting in your ML model. Come on, guys, give me answers in the comments. So you do cross validation, right? You do hyperparameter tuning as well. Different kinds of cross validation as well. You can do hyper tuning. I will just write, right? What else can we do? So overfitting generally comes, I believe what I have seen is overfitting usually comes when there is skewness in data as well, right? So some kind of data augmentation you need to apply as well, right? Balancing the data, balancing classes, right? That you can do. What else? What else can we do for handling overfitting is basically we can simplify the model, right? Use simpler models. And within this simpler models, it is very important now that when you have touched upon models, you explain that there is something called as regularization. And this is where you are driving the conversation. Now, regularization penalizes the model making wrong predictions, right? So what kind of regularizations we can use? L1 and L2. And from there on, you drive the conversation into Ridge and Lasso, right? Ridge and Lasso. You have already prepared for Ridge and Lasso. And from there, you drive conversation to Elastic Net. So this is how you are driving the conversation. Interviewer asked you handling overfitting. You answered what kind of things we can do. And as soon as you answered, you opened one of the areas where you are very prime in, right? Where you have good amount of knowledge. Early stoppings you can use even kind of feature engineering as well, right? So these kind of things as well you can come up in your ML model, building an ML pipeline, and you get full marks for there as well. Now, third question. So third question was about how do you handle hallucinations in LLM, right? So hallucinations in LLM, and how I approach this question is basically I talked about what is an LLM first, right? What is an LLM and how does it makes predictions, right? How does it makes prediction? It basically predicts the next best possible token by predicting its probability. It's in very layman terms, right? Next prediction. Now, when the interviewer is asking you this particular question, you have to ask back stating when you are saying hallucination in an LLM, are you talking about a general LLM? When I say general LLM, it's basically, are you talking about GPT-5? And if he's talking, and if he says that yes, I'm talking about it, then what basically becomes your answer is that in order to tackle hallucinations, you need to provide more restrictive information. Restrictive information. And providing more restrictive information is basically building a RAG. So you build a RAG where the data that you provide is more yours, right? Your data, and your model become and you avoid a large number of hallucination. Then the another thing is you do grounding. Grounding means you are doing some kind of LLM retrieval and you want to validate that LLM retrieval. So validating becomes by re-ranking, right? This is one way of doing grounding. You can provide another set of data over here as well for your LLM retrieval so that if it says that the Prime Minister of India is Narendra Modi, it is picking up from Wikipedia, but it should pick up the same level of information from Indian origin government data sources as well, right? So it is making sure whatever it is getting from one source, it is there in the second source as well, and it validates that information, right? And then the third part is basically where you say prompt engineering, right? So prompt engineering is where you tell that there has to be uh, more boundaries so that it does not goes beyond the specific asked question, timeline, time frame, location, and all these things, right? And if you are doing some kind of problem statement which involves a supply chain or things like that, you should have basically few short prompting technique, few short technique, so that you provide some examples to LLM and LLM understand example to LLM so that LLM understands what kind of information you are looking for, right? Then the fourth question, this was the third question, right? Yeah, and here you also get full marks, right? Now the fourth question. So the fourth question was more about how do you save cost in GenAI pipelines, right? GenAI pipelines. This is a more of a subjective question to be precise. This comes with experience. So in my what I answered as part of that is in GenAI pipeline, when you are building, you need different kind of products, tools, right? For example, you need vector DB, you need an index, right? You need an LLM as well, right? And you need some platform to host it, right? And I have not considered data as well. Let's consider data for this data storage as well, right? So based on the problem statement, you need to identify whether you need to build a vector DB or not, right? And when I say build a vector DB or not, this is where I'm saying build or not is where I'm saying if you have 1 million of rows and with some business rule, you can shrink this down to 10K rows or 10K data points. You can create a vector DB, a fast index on the fly locally in your system and then destroy it This is much more faster than saving these 10K rows every time to an AI index or saving these million vector points on a index every time and using an API call to retrieve it. Right. So these kind of things are more subjective. You have to identify if your problem statement can solve that. Then the another thing is that LLM takes in a prompt, right? So you can provide your prompt as illustrative as you can. When I say as illustrative, is basically you can use somewhere around 3000 words to ask your LLM to do some action. Or in the same 3K words, you can optimize it with different prompt techniques. And we have just seen the techniques above over there, right? You can do a zero shot, you can do a few shot. If you are asking for a certain material, let's say with some dimensions, some descriptions, you should provide what should be the format in which the LLM should return, the vendor name, the product information, the dimensions, and all these things, right? So prompt techniques are also very helpful because the less tokens that you send in, the more optimized response you will get from LLM. And this is where you can save your token because organizations like OpenAI or Microsoft Enterprises, they are charging based on tokens or message. Right. Perfect. Then it comes to platform and data storage. You can use either Azure ML or you can use Databricks, and based on your pipeline schedule or occurrence you can use. Now for data storage as well, you can either use an Azure data storage or you can use a MySQL, or you can every time load data from a local Excel sheet, right? So this is one of the subjective questions that I believe to be is there in my interview. Now coming to the very last question that I got was basically handling data leakage. Now, this is where most of you who are working in e-commerce or in retail segments, they already know how do you handle basically data leakage, right? What is data leakage? So I started with what is data leakage, right? What is data leakage? And it is the theoretical definition that I gave in is basically there is some information creeping into model or into training process, right? And this information is coming from outside. I don't know from which outside. It could be that there are there is in your data set you have variable x, y, z, and tr, and then somewhere x is equal to ab plus of pm, right? And somehow for, let's say, for 10k rows you have AB presenting there, being there, heavily influencing variable X. But then for some 2k rows, suddenly PM is heavily influencing your X, right? So in this case, you need to make a balance. You need to understand how does is X performing, right? So this is where you need to, so how do I handle in that case, right? So I handle by a more optimized train and test combination, right? Train and test combination. I identify whether there is a leakage in my feature variables versus target variable, right? And then I go on to do a one thing which I have learned over the years is that when you want to handle data leakage, generally what happens is that people, aspirants who are doing the ML problem, you have a data set and you apply scaling on that data set and then you do splitting, right? This is what I have been doing as well in my early years. But what you learn as part of data leakage is that to be a more, this is not a wrong practice, but this is a bad practice, I would say. When you are building an end-to-end ML pipeline, you have to consider that what kind of features that are going to come as part of your final deployment scenarios as well. Let's say you have 25 features and in while deploying, the user only enters 22 features. In that case, you need to augment those three missing features, right? So in this case, you need to handle these features as well. So this is one way. And the another way is that once you have that data, you first split into train and test. And then you apply the scaling individually. So this what happens is that why we are doing this is that scaling and encoding, they are done on the entire data set and information from validation or test influences the training process. But if you do a split and then you scale this, it becomes a more standard best practices which violates the highlighted repeatedly in ML guidelines. Right. So these were the five theoretical questions. Now we will quickly move to the coding questions. Right. So I'll go to my notepad and this is the first question that I was asked for. Now what happens over here? This is more of a DL deep learning question. If people have done some programming of transformers or CNN and RNN, this is what they have asked. They say that we have a sequence over here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there is a pad value of 0. And then the final sequence that they want to return is that each of this sequence should match to the length of the maximum length that is there in the sequence. So I am going to pad a 0 over here. I'm going to pad two zeros over here. And I have to do it via mask. I have to track which all indices and which all locations I have padded it. Right? So that is basically my mask. So let's start doing this. So what I did is first I have to identify. So I will write the pseudocode that I write over there is basically I have to identify max length from my sequence. That is one thing I have to do. And then the second thing that I have to do is basically I have to add the padding to my sequence based on the difference of max length and the pad length or the that the current sequence subsequence length. I think I should call that, yeah, subsequence length, right? And then finally the same has to be oh, finally the same has to be done with masks, right? So max length is going to come from so I will say for sequence in sequences, right? And I will take sequences as input. So I will just do a copy of this, Control C. I will wrap it up into a Python function as well. That is not a problem. And then I have to take the pad value as well, which I will take, right? So I will say for sequence in sequences, and this is where I will take the length of the sequence, and if I wrap it up all into list, and then I have to wrap it up into a max function. So this way I know that when I'm looping one for and for, I know that this is the three. So I've looped in and I've got the max of length of the sequence. Correct. Now once I've got the max, this is where I'm going to create my padded list of lists, right? So again, I have to do the same thing. So I will start with something like for sequence in sequences, right? So I know that I am iterating and I have this value currently in hold on, right? So this is the sequence. So first I will calculate what is the how many pads I need to add over there at that moment, right? So I will say max of length, which I have, and I will say minus of length of sequence, right? So in this case, max of length is 3 and this is minus of length of is 3. So this becomes 0. So if it becomes 0, then I am going to add those many zeros. So I need to add pad value in that case, right? So if it becomes 0, so this becomes 0 multiplied by 0, which is 0. And this will basically get added to my sequence, right? So what happens is basically I loop in the sequence. I fetch the current sequence. I fetch how many pads I need to add, and those pad gets multiplied by the number of zero values that I need to do, and I need to do that for there as well. And similarly, I have to do it for pad as well. So I will just do a copy. I have to do for mask as well. So I will do a copy over here. Control V. I will do mask. Now I know that in mask, instead of sequence, I need to have add 1 wherever it is true, right? And the pad value that I need to do over here is basically 0, not a list. I mean, not a single value, but a list. And how many ones I need to do is basically the length of the sequence. So if I debug this again back, what happens is I loop in, I get the sequence. So I get sequence 4, 5. So here the maximum length is 3, 3 minus of 2, which gives me 1. So I need to add only 1 0. Correct. And I need to add 1 0. That goes okay. And then this gets added to 1th of length of sequence. This becomes mask. Ha. So this is basically length of sequence. So 1 gets produced 2 times. So this will become 1 1 0. Right. And then so now let's wrap this up into a Python function. So I will say def tensor problem, and what I am taking in is basically I am taking in sequences and I am taking pad value, and here I'll return padded and mask, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call padded comma mask is equal to tensor problem of sequences comma pad value, and I'm going to print padded first and then I'm going to print mask, right? Let's save this and now let's try running this in our terminal. It says can only concatenate list, not into list, which is padded is equal to sequence of plus of pad value. Okay, so yeah, pad value is going as a 0, so this has to be a list as well, right? Because we are doing as 0, so this has to be a singular entry as well. Let's try running it again. Ha. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, comma 0, 6, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0. So yes, so this was one of the question. So here we can see what we did is we added the pads, which is basically here. How many times is basically the number of missing times. And that is exactly what we did is we replaced the number of times it is there by padding the number of missing times, the 0. This was one of the question, and then the another question was more about the ML coding problem where they gave me a binary classification for a random forest classifier, and they say that you have to find issues in the code. Issue could be there is no syntax issue code, but issue could be a fundamental code of how do you do an ML pipeline, right? And this is where it was important that the one of the question that we had over here, right, handling data leakage, this was supposed to be identified over here. Here you can see the scalar transform that we are doing on fit transform of x, and then we are splitting. This should have been the other way around, right? So this is what has to be basically, and the interviewer was basically looking into this, whatever my logic was coming in, and I didn't do this, and this is what exactly I learned, right? So we have to do handle data leakage by splitting first and then scaling. That was one. Then the another thing that you need to do is what I did is here we are not doing any hyper tuning, and this is where to prevent overfitting we should do hyper parameter tuning or uh, cross validation technique, right? Then here they were doing a predict test and they were looking at the accuracy, but we have seen that for classification problem accuracy is not one of the good metric, right? So this is another thing where I said that if given that it is a binary problem, and so we should basically use precision and trade off. precision and recall trade-off served by F1 score, and how good the model is is evaluated using AUC ROC curve to identify how good the predicted zeros are zeros and how good the ones are ones, right? So that is one of the things that I learned as part of one of the other interview as well, right? This and what else? Hyperparameter tuning, overfitting, classifier.fit, predict, fit transform, standard scalar, target. Yeah, these are the three things that were identified, right? So these are the kind of the problems that were there as part of the interview, and you should also expect the same level of theoretical questions as well as the coding questions. The whole interview was about 1 hour. I just gave you within 30 minutes. So all the best, and I am planning to do a bit more. I have interview questions from Walmart, from Shell, from Deloitte, from Accenture, from Cordvo.ai, for which I have appeared, and these are the succeeding in interview questions that you will get to see on my page. Just a thing before I wrap up, you can find all of the code on my repository. I will put this link into the YouTube video below as well. And there is the YouTube interview question series. This is the repo where you will get to see all the interview questions that are going to be posted for different organizations that I'm going to cover. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day, and